Today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
Thank you, Dr. Paul.
Well, very good. The President gave another speech yesterday on foreign policy to cheer us on, except I didn't see a whole lot of cheer in it, even though he tried to spin our foreign policy and what's happening in the Middle East in a favorable manner. Killing more people, killing the bad guys, no American troops on the ground, making progress, training troops over there to do the groundwork. Yet that training program, as you know, hasn't been going all that well. I think they have about 100 out of 5,000 that they wanted. So that isn't the answer. But at the same time, he was talking about this. He was also not talking about where they were expanding their role, you know, whether it was in Yemen, 172 people killed in Yemen yesterday with bombing. So we're on a military path, yet he was willing to admit that there is no military solution for that. But the complaints came from both sides. You know, the Hawks wanted, you know, the complaints he's not doing enough, you know, more. And others might say, well, he needs to back off and do this sort of thing. The one thing that I noticed that wasn't present in the discussion was there was nobody on TV yesterday to say, hey, look, it isn't the question of too much or too little. It's a question of whether we should be doing it or not. You know, the non-intervention position isn't even discussed.
Well, that's extremist.
Yeah, that's it. But, you know, the one person that they interviewed, and she was in Congress when I was there and you were on the staff, that was Jane Harman. And she's a foreign policy expert, right? You know, so they had her on, and she followed a military guy, and I think it was on CNN, and the military person was really pretty good, you know, questioning, you know, everything that was done, and he was not a McCainite type person, but he put a pretty good perspective on it. And she came on and she sort of deferred to him, and she said, well, yeah, sort of, but guess what she said that was great about the speech is nothing can happen, nothing good can come out of Syria until we get rid of Assad. Are you surprised to hear something like that from her?
I'm just surprised that she has the gall to show her face in public. You know, if you remember, she was in the middle of a spy scandal. That's why she sort of disappeared. She was caught in an NSA wiretap, telling an Israeli agent that she's going to lobby the Justice Department to reduce the charges on these AIPAC operatives who are accused of spying for Israel. So apparently she's back in the limelight.
And she has her own think tank, and if there's any place to rehabilitate somebody along those lines, it's probably CNN. But at least there was a little bit of balance there, but the conclusion was obviously that you know, the real program has to be getting rid of Assad.
And like you said, that they're not able to recruit people, and I just saw in the news today that they're going to lower their standards. They supposedly had a high standard of making sure these guys weren't too radical, they weren't jihadists, but now they're going to lower those in hopes that they'll attract more people.
Well, going from one point, things are going well, to the assumption and the declaration. The headline here says Obama says defeating Islamic State requires sustained effort. And they've been saying this for a long time. And to put this into perspective in his speech, Obama came across, he seemed to sound sensible. You know, sometimes they sound sensible even though the program is not that sensible. He says, be prepared. This is nothing that's going to happen overnight, which is pretty obvious to everybody. This is generational. It's going to take a long time. Be prepared, which means American taxpayers wake up. Besides, we got to keep our military-industrial complex alive and well. So it's generational. And also, you can't solve these problems of the Middle East if you don't deal with economic policy. And if you look back over the last several years, those who wanted to orchestrate revolutions in these countries were able to tap into people who were having trouble paying for their meals. And there was economic problems and inflation. People were unhappy. Same way with Ukraine and other places. So he says it's economic, and he also says there's these sectarian problems. Now, my assumption is that anything we have done so far, if we'd have recognized that, we might have recognized our policy being a contributing factor on this. Would you think that would be a fair assessment?
So going back certainly to the invasion and even before, I mean, our U.S. policy toward Iraq especially created these sectarian divisions. And now the U.S. has nothing left to do now that it's let the cat out of the bag, but to embrace those sectarian differences. I just saw a couple of news items this week that the Kurds on the ground in Syria are becoming the U.S.'s best friends. They're helping with targeting. They're becoming sort of the boots on the ground. Well, that, as you know, presents a whole other world of problems for the administration, especially if you think about Turkey and the sensitivities they have.
You know, as these rebel groups, and there's various numbers, but they do come together with one thing. They all resent us being there. And there is an incentive, you know, to join. But now, as the radicalism grows and the violence grows and the beheadings occur, all of a sudden, guess who? One group that's being killed are Christians. You know, and yet at the same time that Christians are being killed and beheaded, which is so atrocious, how is it that we're still able to go to war and be an accomplice with the Saudis, and the Saudis happy to endorse this type of thing? But I've heard many people say, and you can, you know, find it in the history, that groups, whether it's Sunni and Shia and Christian, there's history of time when they actually lived together and mingled together, and there wasn't this thing. So the more I think foreign governments get involved, and that is the West, us and Europe, the more likely it is that the sectarianism gets split.
Well, this goes back to Jane Harman. She wants to destroy the one person who actually had some success in having these different communities live together. In Syria, you know, the Christians, the Shia, the Sunni, the Druze and others, they did live in relative harmony in a secular state. Not to say that we endorse everything that Assad did, but that's a fact. So she clearly doesn't care that these other groups are getting killed.
Well, at this very moment today, I understand there's going to most likely be a vote on a suspension bill, which means suspension. That means suspend all common sense and all debate. But I sort of like suspension day because I would look for bills. The bill we want to talk about is one that I would have, if I could have been in the right place at the right time, been on the floor and demanding time in opposition like I did in 1998 in opposition to the Iraqi Freedom Act and say, hey, this is bad stuff. But anyway, there's a bill coming up. It's H.R. 907 by Ross Leitonen from Florida, who's very, very high up in Congress on foreign affairs. And this has to do with Jordan. Now, Jordan doesn't get in the news a whole lot. I mean, we don't mention Jordan as much as we mention Syria, although it touches Syria and all. But this is one of these bills that I think would be important to have a debate. But I know earlier on you predicted that they might not even record the vote.
Yeah, my guess is it'll be not a recorded vote.
Not a recorded vote, and that'd be a shame. But if it does, they're lucky if they get 30 or 40 because it's humanitarian, help the refugees. But it's also, well, you got to help out the military-industrial complex. What is it? $3 billion appropriation or authorization to go to Jordan at a time when, you know, we aren't exactly in good financial shape. But this kind of a bill is the kind that passes without debate, and it's doing exactly opposite of what the president wants to do. He's expanding this militarism. This is a military bill that they're talking about.
And, you know, this is great, the juxtaposition of one paragraph talking about increasing U.S. appropriations, increasing U.S. aid to Jordan from $600 million to $1 billion per year for the next several years. And then you skip over just 2 paragraphs later. It's very brazen and blatant that we need to offer to sell more defense articles, defense services, design and construction services, and major defense equipment to Jordan.
I wonder how that got in there. And of course, I think people have done some studies, and I think every state builds military weapons one way or another. So everybody contributes, so nobody's supposed to ever vote against those bills.
But, you know, in the region, this is all, you know, the welfare for the military-industrial complex is one thing, but, you know, Jordan has been a reliable partner with the U.S., Turkey, and Israel in applying pressure onto Syria and trying to get Assad overthrown. They hosted a lot of these black sites, the CIA black training sites where they trained jihadis. They were all in Jordan. So this also has geopolitical implications ramifications as well. If Jordan is going to be pumped up with more weapons and stuff, it could be the preparation for an invasion.
You know, the big question is, it's amazing to me, at least, that Assad has survived, because you have the countries that you just mentioned opposed to him, but then you have those from the extreme opposition for religious reasons are against them. So there's not that many on the surface, at least, that sounds like that. But here he keeps surviving and surviving, and it'll be interesting to see what it'll be like in 5 years from now, because eventually people run out of energy and money and people to fight wars. So it will have to come to an end.
But you know, if, as the U.S. claimed, that the people were all against him, there's no way he could have survived this long anyway.
That's right. There has to be, and that also, in the other side of the coin is some of these radicals get support because the people are with them. But I think it is significant to realize that the people's attitudes are important, even under these terrible situations, and this is why the training doesn't work. We send all the money and the troops and the promises, and yet they don't want to come over and fight. And if they do, they figure it might be a deal to sell some weapons. Get hold of a rifle, I'm going to sell it, you know. And then they get into a battle and they drop their weapons and they run off. It's just so messy. To me, it's a real shame that non-intervention gets so little attention, because that really is the answer. And they will refuse to admit that the reason we're in this mess, it isn't because some radical Islamists hate our freedoms and they hate our prosperity. I think that is irrelevant to many of them. And yet it's all based on that. There is an absolute unified effort to squelch anything to suggest that our foreign policy backfires on us, that putting the Shah in control of Iran for a good many years helped radicalize those who took over in 1979. And until that happens, we're not going to solve this problem. We're going to have this bickering between two factions in Washington, the ones who want to tinker with strategy and those who want bombs and troops on the ground. But and it'll be a partisan thing too, but agitation is their goal, and support for the military-industrial complex is still alive and well. And this bill, like Daniel just said, it's going to pass. The military-industrial complex will be the only ones who benefit from this. The people over there are not going to benefit. Peace is not going to benefit by it. And the generational war, the war that's going to last for a long time, which seems like they almost do it on purpose, because if our policies are leading to a war that's going to last forever, why don't we change our policy and decide it's time to do something different? And that is my argument and our case for arguing the case that a pro-American strong national defense is one to mind our own business and bring our troops home. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.